Welcome back to The Explainer. So today, we're diving straight into a really fascinating research note from the Rizzoni Library, and it asks a pretty defining question. Where exactly is East Africa's next major economic boom going to emerge over the coming decade? And just to be clear, we aren't talking about your run-of-the-mill generic economic growth or some temporary spike in GDP. No, we're tracking a massive structural transformation taking place right now, specifically looking at the window between 2026 and 2036. If you want to understand the actual mechanics of how an emerging market evolves into an absolute industrial powerhouse, well, this is exactly where you need to be looking.
Now, there's this incredibly powerful idea at the heart of this research. It argues that opportunity leaves footprints long before it ever becomes obvious to the rest of the world. Think about it. Long before a huge manufacturing boom makes international headlines, there are always these physical, undeniable signals happening on the ground. Before the shiny new factories open, the electricity grids are stabilized. Before a massive logistics company scales up, thousands of miles of roads are already being paved and these giant warehouses are being raised. Catching these early physical signals, it's honestly one of the absolute best ways to forecast the economic future of any region.
All right, let's jump into Part 1, Spotting Economic Footprints.
When you look across countries like Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Ethiopia, we aren't just seeing a bunch of isolated, random construction projects. We are tracking a total structural transition. For decades, the dominant economic model for this whole region was heavily weighted toward extracting raw materials and then, immediately shipping them away to be processed somewhere else. But watch this shift. The new goal, and the reality being actively built right now, is all about domestic capability. It's the transition to processing, manufacturing, maintaining, and innovating entirely within their own borders. We're talking about a complete rewiring of the regional economy.
Which brings us nicely to Part 2, Resources versus Capabilities.
Traditional economic models just love to fixate on what minerals a country has buried in the ground or what crops grow in its soil. But history consistently shows us that simply having raw iron ore or raw milk doesn't automatically make a region wealthy. True wealth, that requires the capability to actually transform those resources. Iron ore has pretty limited economic value until local talent can design, build, and operate a steel mill, right? Raw coffee beans are great, for sure, but coffee creates exponential wealth when it gets roasted, packaged, branded, and distributed locally. Milk becomes this massive economic driver only when you have the facilities to process it into cheese, yogurt, or powdered products with a long shelf life. This whole transition is really about keeping those profit margins inside the region by adding value locally.
Let's move on to Part 3, the 7 opportunity frontiers.
So the research points to 7 specific, interconnected frontiers that are driving this shift: mechanization, manufacturing, agriculture and value addition, infrastructure, energy, logistics, and digital infrastructure. But here's the secret. Don't view these as isolated silos. You've got to think of them as this deeply interconnected web. When you have reliable energy and modern digital infrastructure acting as a foundational platform, your everyday transaction costs absolutely plummet. And when those costs drop, suddenly mechanized agriculture becomes financially viable, logistics networks can expand efficiently, digital integration with physical industries, stuff like mobile supply chain payments or predictive maintenance on tractors becomes an everyday reality. Literally every single frontier feeds directly into and accelerates the next one.
Okay, Part 4, the hidden capability gap.
Whenever we talk about emerging markets, the default assumption is almost always that money is the only missing ingredient. People kind of assume that if you just pour enough foreign direct investment into a country, it's just magically going to industrialize. But look at this dynamic carefully. You can secure the capital to build a massive, state-of-the-art industrial park, sure, but it literally stays locked up and completely unproductive if you don't have the people to actually run it. The real, hidden friction holding back growth isn't capital at all, it's the local capability threshold. Investment only translates into actual production when that capability threshold is actually met.
To unlock those 7 frontiers we just talked about, the region desperately needs an absolute army of local technical talent. We're talking about the critical middle-class builders of an economy, the electricians, the specialized welders, machinists, software developers, surveyors, supply chain managers. You simply cannot import these jobs indefinitely. It's way too expensive and, honestly, completely unsustainable. The countries that aggressively train this specific tier of talent, they are the ones that experience rapid industrial explosions. Why? Because when the foreign direct investment finally shows up, the human capability is already right there on the ground, ready to execute.
Let's dive into Part 5, the systems effect.
Watch how opportunity literally breeds opportunity in this exact sequence. Economic development almost never happens in a vacuum. It triggers this powerful chain reaction. So first,
core infrastructure improves. Say a new regional road gets paved. Boom, immediately transport costs drop because trucks can move faster with way less wear and tear. That lower overhead then acts as this massive magnet for logistics firms, which in turn makes local manufacturing highly profitable in that specific area. As those new factories scale up, the demand for skilled technical workers, like those welders and machinists we mentioned, spikes dramatically. And finally, local technical education expands to meet that surging demand. If you can understand how this entire system cascades, you can predict exactly where the next wave of opportunity is going to hit, way before the rest of the market catches on.
And finally, part 6, the decade ahead. So, as we look at the strategic outlook for 2026 to 2036, it's absolutely vital to understand that this region's transformation won't come from some single magic technology. It's not going to be one overnight mega project that changes everything in an instant. Instead, it's going to come from the compounding effect of thousands of incremental, interconnected improvements. Every single warehouse that opens, every new technician who graduates, every modern machine that gets installed, all of it gradually lowers the economic friction of doing business. Lower friction expands local capability, which generates new wealth, which then attracts even more investment. It is this brilliant, self-reinforcing flywheel. The strongest opportunities over the next 10 years are going to emerge right at the intersection of these compounding trends.
So to wrap things up and look toward the immediate future, I want to leave you with one defining question. Based on the interconnected capabilities being built right now across East Africa, what products currently being imported could very soon be manufactured locally? Think about everyday goods, agricultural tools, processed foods. As that capability threshold rises, what was considered completely impossible yesterday becomes highly economically viable tomorrow. Keep a close eye on those footprints. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep learning.